So here's a pretty cool thing about the current market, which is ironic because it was very popular in a market 20 years ago, which is seller financing. Well, hey guys, I'm Boyd the broker. It can actually help a deal both for the seller and the buyer, which is crazy. So here it is. As a seller, if you're worried that you're not going to get as much money as what you want, like if you said your place was worth 1.4 and I told you, no, it's really worth 1.3, and we stuck to what I told you it was worth and we're going to market it at 1.3, how can you make a little extra money? Well, if you don't get multiple bidding, what you can get is seller financing. So let's say, because here's the thing, if you've got a lot of equity in the property, if it's worth 1.3 and you only owe 200,000 on it, you've got 1.1 million in equity. And let's say you're not sure what you're going to do with that money. Let's say you were of the pattern where you are not using that money to acquire another property. What are you going to do with that money? You're going to put it in the bank, you're going to put it in the stock market, you're going to risk it, you're going to lose money. I can make a very good argument for you as a seller to actually let the buyer use that, which makes it more attractive to more people, which ultimately gets you more money. More buyers is more money, more options. But let's say you get a couple percent in the bank, or you can get, let's say, 6% from a buyer. 6% is pretty good on 1.1, and it's guaranteed fixed. And then you're worried. You're like, oh, what if the buyer doesn't pay his payment or anything? Well, you know what? Whatever the buyer put down, you can foreclose on them just like a bank. That's what people don't get. You almost want the buyer to not make payments, because then you keep his deposit as long as you got enough of a deposit. So if they pay in 1.3 and they gave you, 300,000, you can keep his 300,000. And if he didn't make his mortgage payment, which was not that much, over a certain few months, and with the foreclosure laws, you went through the proceedings and you got the property back, you kept his down payment, that 300 grand, plus you get to resell it. So it's not bad. So the risk is not as great when you look at it that way. And then buyers, it's kind of cool for a buyer because seller financing may or may not necessarily even show up on your credit report. So if you're buying other things or you're doing other things and you don't want the big debt to show up, I can't promise it, but I've heard that it may not show up, which could be advantageous. And then there's no fees involved. So there's these lenders that charge, a point. You say 1 point, that's 1% of the loan. And if it's $1 million loan, well, that's a lot of money. That's 10 grand. That's a lot. You can avoid all these fees. And there's not just points and different things. These loan guys, they charge a lot of money that go into the pocket of the mortgage company that you can avoid. So you get a decent rate. Maybe, you can negotiate it. Either it's at the same as market or maybe a little bit below to make it more attractive. But as long as a buyer, if you're giving them, 20 to 30, a little bit more down payment, your money's secure. You're keeping the property off your credit report, possibly, which could help your credit. And then you usually do about up to 10 years. I always told people to do up to 10 years, and you can pay it off at any time. And you usually sometimes can also do interest only, which helps you out. So seller financing, it's an old school way of keeping the deal together, is actually a pretty good option for both buyer and seller, especially in this kind of market. No doubt about it. So here's something specific. Let's say you own a property in Manhattan Beach, and a year or two ago, the place was worth 2.5. Some people were maybe even getting 2.6, right in that range. Let's say it's worth only about 2.2 or 2.3 now. How can you make up the difference? Seller financing. It's beautiful. If you have the equity available in that property, seller financing is going to get you a decent interest rate, and that actually bridges the gap between what you could have sold it for at the peak of the market and maybe what you're selling it for now. That's truly what seller financing can do for you. And if you're worried about the security of it, you really shouldn't be, because if you get to keep the guy's deposit. So there's a lot of different rules and different things that are done during the contract to truly protect it. But it really bridges the gap between you thinking that, oh my gosh, I should have sold it last year or the year before when things were crazy, to selling it now. If it's the right time for you to sell now, that'll make it, that bridges the gap. Pretty good thing for sellers right now. You know, the big thing I'm seeing right now is back on market. And back on market's really interesting because that means two things. That means the buyers changed their mind, which is most likely because they either thought they paid too much or there was something wrong with the house, or it's back on market because the sellers didn't want to, you know, there's something going on right now in the market where if I sold a property for 2.1 and I'm a seller and I think that every seller thinks their place is worth more. But if I think that I should have got 2.3 a few years ago and I'm selling it for 2.1, I'm a little bit pissed off, right? I'm a little bit uneasy about selling it for 2.1. And so part of me is saying, okay, I'll sell it for 2.1, but I'm not fixing anything. I'm not doing anything. And then the buyer goes, oh, yeah, everybody says they're not going to fix anything. But then they do the inspection and then they find out, hey, you know what? The plumbing isn't right. Some of the toilets need to be replaced. So there's cracks in the hardwood floor. There's all these things now that you see. And then the buyer goes, okay, now I want to get some extra money after the inspection. You're going to have to fix these things. Well, then the seller's like, forget it. I said 2.1 and I wasn't doing anything else and I don't care about anything. Well, then the deal falls out. That's going on right now. And I think the way to counteract that is every seller needs to go into a deal knowing that the home inspection is there to protect the buyer, but it's also there to protect the seller. There's a lot of things that are wrong in the house that we just live with that you don't know about. But if there's major things that are a code violation or something that's broken that even could lead up to something really bad, it's actually in your best interest and it reduces liability if you take care of that now. So that's the thing. There is an old school way of some buyer's agents bringing in buyers that they say, oh, we'll just pay this price and then we'll use the inspection to renegotiate. That's rough, and that does happen in the beach cities. And that'll upset a seller. It upsets the whole deal, really, and that can make deals fall out too. Is because buyers all of a sudden get in and then they start saying, oh, now I want a $50,000 reduction, or oh, I want the backyard landscaped, or I want a new roof, or I want hardwood floors now. I mean, it's ridiculous. You can't do that, and that's the seller gets pissed off and then the deal goes. Both parties need to go into the inspection and the deal with the same intentions. I'll sell it fairly, I'll buy it fairly. And that's when having one broker can actually usually make that happen a lot easier, because I'm not telling two different stories. Unfortunately, most deals have agents telling two different stories. And people used to be terrified. I would have buyer and seller in the same room half the time because I'm only telling one story. And again, it comes down to, as long as the buyer wants to be fair and the seller wants to be fair, I'm like the referee in the middle. I can get it done. But when the intentions are different on both parties, or if there's two agents and the two agents want to seem smarter than they are, and to prove that they're smarter than they are, they want to create conflict. Well, that's unfortunately what happens in a regular real estate transaction. And that's why everybody's afraid of doing a real estate deal. There's nothing to be afraid of. Keep your eyes wide open. You'll be fine. Here's a great story. With seller financing, I've gone through most everything. I did so much real estate back in the day. I retired, I came back, I had a stroke. I've got all this big story. And part of my stories involve like 2008 when everything hit the fan and there was all the problems with the banks and everything crashed and everything. There were still sellers and buyers. And I was actually a buyer in that market. And I bought from my client in the hill section on Dianthus in Manhattan Beach. They needed to sell. So that's the thing. In any market, there's going to be buyers and sellers because there's going to be different reasons for a person to buy a house and a person to sell a house. They're not just going to do it because the market's up, because the market's down. Their job changes, their lifestyle changes. These people had a rental property. They were getting ready to retire. The timing was right for them to sell, The rest of the world was dealing with with the bank crisis and everything's going down. So it wasn't the right time for the world to sell, but it's the right time for them to sell. So they need to figure out how they can get compensated and still not think that they sold at a completely wrong time, even though that was the right time for them. So they did seller financing. To me, I acquired the property and did seller financing. We went a couple percentage points below the current market. I didn't have the loan appear on my credit report, so it didn't look like I had more debt. It was a fair interest rate. I gave them a decent down payment, so that made the loan secure. And I bought the property during a very unstable market. But I knew that I was buying a property in a very stable area. The thing about South Bay and Manhattan Beach, Hermosa Beach, Redondo Beach, and PV, it's a stable area. There's people always buying and selling in there. So that's why you can't really time things. And so when I bought that property in 2008, I had it as a rental for a couple years. That's another thing. As a buyer, when you're buying a property, sometimes things don't change overnight. So it's not like I was going to lose money or make money over the next couple months. So I rented it out for maybe 2 years, which seems like a long time, but it's really not. So I rented it out for 2 years, covered a portion of my payment. I had my tax guy cover whatever differences were made. And then at the end of the rental property, I ended up building on that place. And I sold it when things started to get better because it took about 1.5 years to build and made a ton of money. So I bought it during a time when nobody else was buying. I took a little bit of a hit, a small hit for the rental income compared to what I was paying in seller financing. And then I tore it down and built it when things reduced. So everything that I'm telling other people to do, I did myself. And I made out like a bandit. I did really well. I built something good. I looked at the costs and I sold it and I did good. And I can help people out and make them make these decisions because it's not just about next month. It's not just about 4 months. You got to have a plan. You sit down, you draft a plan, you figure it out. Simple as that. So these are super rough numbers. I got old and I had a stroke. So a lot of stuff's happened since then. But let's say I bought it for 1.1 and I did seller finance and I actually took over their loan and then made payments for them, which is like a whole other level of seller financing called AITD, a all-inclusive trust deed. Wow, now I'm remembering some craziness. But I think their payment was maybe $2,800 a month. I was renting it out for maybe $2,500 a month, so I'm losing $300 a month, which people said, oh, you're losing $300 a month, you're an idiot. No. I was writing off the payment, so my accountant as a second property, I was writing off the interest payment. I was losing $300, but I knew something was going to happen in the horizon. So I had 2 years of losing $300, but when I tore it down and then built when the market was coming back a little bit, because it takes 1.5 years to build, so I allowed the market to come up again, I sold it for almost $4.2 million. And so I made at least I made over $1 million. And so, people were calling saying I was an idiot and didn't know what I was doing. Well, I did pretty good, and I can do that for my clients too. I've been around the block. I've seen this. I've done that a couple times now that I think about it. Here's the big thing that makes me a lot different from other real estate agents. Income property. I don't sell a lot of income property because the old school way of income property was you'd buy a property, you'd make a bunch of money from the renters if there's multiple units, and then you'd live off that money that you make, which is fine. But I want to go one step further and then another step. I want you to make money off the equity. That's where the real money is making the equity money. And that's what I did. And I go one step even above that is the equity money and then maybe the tear down and build money. You start adding up these different levels and that's when you make the big bucks. And so if I'm losing $300 a month, which an income property guy is going to say, you're a complete moron. You're losing $300 a month. I'm making $1,000 a month. Well, good for you. You're making $1,000 a month, but if you paid $800 for it and you sold it for $850 6 years later, well, good for you. I mean, and maybe some people are happy with that. But if I paid $800 for something, I want to sell it for 1.2 and make 400 equity. Or if I paid 800 for something, I want to in 2 years tear it down and then build something and then make $1 million. And I've done that. And it's just, that's the way you really make money. Income property, the old school way, I mean, it's good and it's great and it's a little bit conservative. I don't know. It's not the way to make the money in the South Bay, especially in like Manhattan Beach and Hermosa Beach and those areas. The land is worth more than anything. You get the location. You know, this has been around forever. Location, location, location. Simple as that. That's going to be the way it always is. You know, these guys doing income property, they're out in the outskirts of LA and away from the beach cities and stuff. And then there's multiple units. You know, that's just multiple problems that you can have. That's multiple people that don't make their payment. That's multiple toilets that can back up. That's multiple things that can have all these problems. I always say, buy a really good location, a crappy house, rent it out, take a bit of a hit, but then have a plan to maybe develop it or tear it down and build, or even play the equity game. If it's a great property and you might have to put a few bucks into it over the next few years, do that and then sell it, because everybody always wants the good location. People with money always have money, even in a down market. If you buy the good location, you're gold. I'm Boyd the Broker. I appreciate you tuning into my podcast. I live in the real world. Where do you live?